to Women in Football's latest webinar. We're all very grateful to our members for your support. The feedback we're receiving from you regarding our webinars is so positive and encouraging. We're really glad that you're enjoying this series. We set up the webinars actually in response to the COVID-19 crisis, and we hope that you're finding each event inspiring and informative, even as things start to go back to normal across the globe. We'll be carrying on with our series, so do let us know at events@womeninfootball.co.uk if you'd like to see any webinar on a particular topic. So thank you for today to Lynsey, Robina, Rupinder and Tim for joining us. We're really excited to have you here for what we know will be a really stimulating and engaging conversation about governance, why governance is important, the new FA code for governance, how the new code actually supports women getting onto boards, and how it addresses diversity on sports boards in general. But I'm going to start off by introducing our wonderful panel and host. Do bear with me, but I think it's really important that we hear about the fantastic company within which we find ourselves this afternoon. Beginning with Lynsey. So Lynsey is Head of Corporate Governance at Sport England. After joining the organisation 5 years ago, she was tasked with developing and implementing the Code for Sports Governance, which she co-authored with Women in Football's own Jane Purden. The code set world-leading standards for governance in sport and has affected significant change within the sector. She now works with Sport England's partners and the wider sector on projects and initiatives promoting good governance. So most recently with Tim actually on the FA's governance code for county FAs, which we'll hear about later on. Lynsey's worked in a number of senior governance roles in key public institutions, including being the head of the BBC's executive unit and also Assistant Director of Governance for an NHS Trust. So welcome, Lynsey. Moving on to Dr Robina Shah MBE. Robina is a chartered consultant psychologist, a senior lecturer and director of the Doubleday Centre for Patient Experience in the Division of Medical Education at the University of Manchester. She's an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Practitioners and president of the Medicine and Society Council at the Royal Society of Medicine. Robina is an established author with a special interest in medical education, psychosocial medicine, person-centered care and supporting children with a learning disability. She's also passionate about promoting young people and involving them in decisions about their education, health and mental well-being. Robina's got extensive public service records spanning over 25 years. She has held national and international leadership roles with numerous organisations, and she's the youngest and longest serving chair of the Board of Directors at Stockport NHS Foundation Trust. She's also currently chair of the Seashell Trust Trustee Board, providing specialist services to children and young people with autism, learning disability and complex healthcare needs. Robina's passionate about football and sits on the Manchester FA board as a non-executive director. She also sits on the FA's Women's Football Board and Disability Football Committee. Robina was appointed personally by Her Majesty the Queen, High Sheriff for the County of Greater Manchester. Since 2004, she's also been a Deputy Lieutenant for Greater Manchester. Recent appointments include Chief Ambassador for Greater Manchester Mayor Meet Your Future and Bridge GM, and UK Health Service Trustee and Director to the NHS and National Emergency Services Memorial Trust. In September 2018, Robina was honoured to become one of only 25 women in England and Wales nominated by the public for a living statue that acknowledged her personal and professional achievements. Amazing. Welcome, Robina. Moving next to Tim. Tim is currently Head of Operations for the Grassroots Division of the FA, where he supports the County FA network and grassroots clubs and leagues to develop, administer and regulate football, creating a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. Tim has spent 2 years as a project leader to create a bespoke code of governance for county FAs to help drive diversity and improve skills around the board tables and the decision-making bodies of the county FAs. Prior to this, Tim spent most of his career in the health and fitness industry. His passion has always been about improving the health and fitness of the nation, especially that of children, and through football sees a great opportunity to impact this on a grand scale. Welcome to you, Tim. And finally, Rupinder. Rupinder joined the FA board as a professional game non-executive FA director, appointed jointly by both the Premier League and the English Football League in November 2017. She was appointed onto the Women's Football Board early in 2019, and is also the founder and managing director of the law firm Rupinder and Associates Limited. Who specialise in media, defamation, civil and commercial litigation and sports law. Rupinder qualified as a lawyer in 1999 and set up her own firm as early as 2005. Welcome to you, Rupinder. And at this point, just thank you all again for being here with us. I'm going to hand over to Lynsey at this point.
Thank you, Rimla, for such a fantastic introduction. And wow, listening to that, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk governance with such an esteemed panel who have such a wealth of experience across a variety of different sectors. I think the aim through the course of our discussion and conversation will be for the panel to hopefully share with you their own personal experience and journeys, and hopefully inspire women in football members to think about how they might be able to get involved in governance, as well as taking away some practical tips for how to do that. As Rimla mentioned, we'll also touch on the FA's new governance code for county football associations, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Just before we start, a few ground rules and a bit of housekeeping. So please feel free to introduce yourself. I see some people doing that already on the chat. If you select all attendees and say who you are, what you do and where you're from, and I'm sure I don't need to say it, but please keep the chat positive, respectful and polite. The webinar is also being recorded and will be available on the Women in Football website. I think Cassie's going to try and collate some of those questions, and we'll hopefully carve out some time at the end to answer those, or hopefully touch on them anyway as we go through the course of the conversation. And we know some questions have been sent in beforehand as well, so thank you for that. We have a lot to cover and I'm mindful we only have an hour or a bit less than that now, so let's get straight on. Before we get into the detail probably of the conversation, I just wanted to pause on the word governance for a second. It's a term or a word that's used quite broadly, and we probably hear it a bit more frequently now, for example in the media, particularly if something's gone wrong and there's been some poor governance. So I guess in the sports context you might think about the IAAF or FIFA or cycling, and so I thought it might be worth just pausing there for a second and maybe asking the panelists if they could sort of just describe briefly what they think, you know, what they see as governance and why it's important. I don't know, Rupinder, maybe could I come to you first?
Yeah, I think for me, running a law firm and then being part of the FA, governance really reflects having a set of policies, practices, procedures, just to guarantee some form of cohesion and uniformity in how you address matters, and ultimately can lead to eliminating or at least minimising risk. And that for me is really the essence of governance.
Thanks, Rupinder. Robina, are you able to share your sort of thoughts on, I guess, governance?
So building on what Rupinder's already said, I suppose for me it's really about making sure that the organisation for which you work, so if you're a board member, works to its optimal level safely, that supports its staff and is mindful of the community it serves and the service users it's there to provide a service to.
Thank you. And Tim?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I don't think it's as complicated as it may seem as an area. To me, good governance is the embedding of a professional structure within an organisation that means that the right people are making the right decisions. So by the right people, I mean decisions being made by those people at the appropriate level. For example, business decisions being made by the board. And by the right decisions, I mean that people at this level having the necessary skills, experience and diversity, which results in the best decisions being made.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I guess I agree with all of you. All, you know, that it's such a broad sort of concept, and for me the people part of it is just as important, and it's you have structures, policies, procedures that help you govern in a certain way, and then how the people who are governing use those are just as important. And I have lots of my conversations in my job are not necessarily because there are issues with structures or the policies, but it's perhaps how they've been carried out and used, and that's why I think as we go through the course of the conversation it will be interesting to hear sort of the people human side of it as much as you know, the sort of technical bits of governance, which I think sometimes to people are a bit more scary. So maybe we could start by talking a bit about the code, Tim, and the new code for county football associations, which has recently launched and which Rimla mentioned. I wonder if you could just give us a bit of background about the code, why the FA's introduced it, some of the timelines, and probably in particular any opportunities it might create for women in football members to get involved at county FA level.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Well, we started this piece of work back at the beginning of 2018. County FAs have been around for well over a century, and although they became incorporated bodies back in about 1999, little had changed in their governance structures over these last 2 decades. At the FA, we want counties to be more financially independent and less reliant on grants from the FA. So we identified the need to modernise and professionalise governance within our county networks. The intent with this thinking was to help provide guidance to counties that would allow them to adopt structures that would serve them best in the future. And we thought, you know, that football deserves the very best we have to offer. So we took the Sport England Code as a guide, and we built upon the Tier 3 requirements within this to create a code that was unique for football. It was a gold standard, if you like. It was a collaborative piece of work. We worked with county representatives, forming a working group, along with the FA executive and others, such as yourself and Sport England, to scrutinise all the requirements of the Sport England Code. I think there were 59 requirements in the Sport England Code, and each one was looked at, analysed and debated in detail. Some were removed, some were retained, some were changed, some new ones altogether were created and added. And although we retained the structure of the Sport England Code, which is the 5 principles, we ended up with 65 requirements under those 5 principles. And it's a piece of work I'm really pleased with, because we know we're the only sport in England to have such a standard laid out for the regional governance of its sport. And in my experience, there is a very clear and obvious link from good governance to good performance. And we definitely see that in the world of county FAs. The opportunities for those on this call to get involved are huge. By way of a kind of couple of numbers, we've got, at the last time of counting, which was very recent, 463 directors across 50 county FAs. Unfortunately, the diversity is not where we'd like it to be. In terms of gender diversity, only 13% of those directors are female. So, although our code, like the Sport England Code, says a minimum 30% either gender, clearly we'd like it to be even more balanced than that, 50-50. So that means moving from 13% to 50%, you know, we've got 170 roles that, as counties adopt the code will become available for women. And, you know, my advice for those wanting to explore this as an opportunity is, you know, just be confident. Don't be scared by the terms governance or by the term, you know, director of a board. These are largely, you know, small organisations. And I assure you, you won't be out of your depth. You will have skills that you can bring to the table to complement those already around the table. A problem we have in football is the people who end up on boards at county level often come through the council route, which is the football community, which is great from a football knowledge point of view, but not necessarily always great from a business skills point of view. And those skills are really diverse. You know, operations, finance, technology, facilities, HR, compliance, legal, communications, marketing, I don't know, stakeholder management. It's very broad. And as counties look more and more at the kind of skills matrix that are required for effective boards, you'll soon realise that you have something that you can add and bring to the table.
Thanks, Tim. So, wow, loads of opportunities there then. And I think, you know, the fact that it's county FA means across, you know, that's across sort of England, and that those will be arising, so local to people as well. I wondered, maybe Rupinder, if I could ask you to reflect on your experience of, getting onto boards or applying for positions. What sort of, what are recruiters looking for? How do you apply? What should people be thinking about? If you're able to share some of your own experiences in terms of the boards you're on or have been on previously.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just following on from what Tim has just said, that feeling of, am I good enough to take on this position? That's a real common feeling. I myself had that feeling previously. You know, it's what you've got to overcome, and just gaining experience, I think, in some sort of governance-based roles, whether it is in your own business practice or where you're working right now, or taking up opportunities with schools or charities. I'm also a director of a charity called the Lily Foundation. And fortunately for me, I mean, the positions that I've had have been through nomination as opposed to application. So I've had to go through the interview procedure, etc., but I haven't actually gone out to look for those roles. I've been asked to put my name forward for the board roles that have currently had in the past. But I think what's very important right now for all women who are looking to get onto board positions, it's just to get as much as you can, know about the field that you want to go into, know about what's required, what skills have you got, because you will have transferable skills. You know, as women, I don't mean to sound sexist, but we multitask like, you know, we are the best multitaskers. So you can bring a whole host of transferable skills from your day job over to a board, know about the board, know where it's going, what are their aims, what are they planning to do, and what can you do to try and help them move in the right direction, and build up some experience akin to governance if your role does not at the moment have any governance features into it, if you're not in those positions. You know, as I said, schools are always looking for governors, for help in those kind of committee structures. Join those local charities is another fantastic place. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. And Robina, could I ask you maybe to reflect on your wealth of experience on different boards and in different sectors and different types of organisations as well?
And thank you. I suppose I absolutely agree with both Tim and with Rupinder. I think for me, it's actually taking the first step. The first step is always the hardest because you don't know what to expect in terms of applying for a position. You don't really know what environment you're going to be tapping into, and whether it's something you feel you can contribute to in addition to all of that. But I would say rule number one is be confident and believe in yourself, because for others to value you, you have to value yourself. And everybody, I genuinely believe this, I believe everybody is gifted in some manner or some form. And sometimes it takes others to help us to shine because we can't see it for ourselves. So to be confident, feel valued, put your application in with the intent of hopefully getting to be shortlisted and securing the job. But even if you don't, then learn from it. Because all of the experiences we have in our life, we do learn from them. And that's always a positive thing, because that helps you to grow, both in confidence, but both in your confidence and your understanding of other people's expectations. The board environment is a very different environment depending on whether you're going into a large organisation or a very small one. Some smaller organisations actually don't follow any kind of governance because they don't recognise the term, or they don't contextualise their work within a framework of governance using the definitions that we've all alluded to. So be clear about why you want to apply for the role and what is your give. And absolutely dead centre is the skill set that you bring. And a good board, an effective board, generates and is motivated by the skills that come to the table. But more than that, it's the richness of the conversation that's taken at the table. The fact that you have your lived experience, both personal and professional. You do not need to be in a working job or be a professional or have a badge. Your lived experience as an individual, the fact that you're a mother, a sister, you know, you're somebody who has perhaps only ever worked within the home environment, it doesn't really matter, because we learn skills every day and we utilize them, but we don't unpack them or define them as a skill set that's worthy of an application form. And Rupinder said, you know, women are great at multitasking. We're good organisers. We're very good at time management. We're very good at budgeting. We're very good at making decisions. We're very good at being grounded. In other words, checking things out with others. We're good at communicating. And so are men, Tim. I'm not being exclusive for women. But generically, those sorts of skills are really important skills for how a board functions. So if you take away the definition of governance and just focus on that, I mean, don't focus on that. Focus on what you know about yourself and what you're going to give, and then use that sense check to make the application, or to be nominated, because it can be a combination of both. But absolutely, do take your foot forward and come and join us on the boards. We will be fascinated by your experience, and we will learn from you, and at the same time we will learn together.
Thanks. And I couldn't agree more in terms of, I guess, one of the reasons for having this conversation is almost to dispel that myth of governance. You know, if you're on a board, you know about governance, and you sort of got to have that skill set as well. I think absolutely that and you talked about lived experience, which I think is so important. It's often, you know, in implementing the code we have for Sport England and talking about diversity, we're talking about that lived experience, the different perspectives that you bring to that board discussion, and knowing that actually the sort of whatever it is that your background has been, or your life has been, you're bringing that into that boardroom different to somebody else. I wanted to ask about, because it's sort of, I guess there's the process of applying and getting onto a board, whether you've experienced any challenges or barriers, I guess, in your journey, and how you might have overcome those. I don't know, Robina or Rupinder or Tim, in terms of being on boards, if there's anything any of you can sort of say about that and the challenges and how you've sort of faced those, I guess.
So for me, I can start, because I've been very fortunate to have been on many types of different boards, both within the voluntary sector, independent sector, and across different sort of service contexts as well. I think it depends what you're looking for. So if you are an experienced board member and you apply for different organisations, you don't always make it, because the competition is fierce. And also to remember that some of these positions are not remunerated, so you give your time freely, and I think that's always a good thing, because what you learn in your free time is probably the best gift you have in life, because you choose something because you want to do it, and you're not doing it because you know your baseline is to be funded. Having said that, it is nice to have your expenses paid if that can be provided, because everybody, you know, we all need to be able to not be in debt, or not be in an uncomfortable position by giving your time so freely. I think when you apply for positions, usually the job descriptions are almost the same. The unique thing about them is what the organisation doesn't tell you on the application. So I would say, from my experience, the best way to apply for any sort of job is to look at the skills that you have and what you're going to bring, but then go onto the organisation's website and learn about what they're doing. Look at past board papers, look at past minutes, look at their annual report, get a sense check of what this organisation stands for. For me, I'm very, very values-based driven, so the connection has to be that the values base of this organisation aligns with my own. Because I want to work with people who are open, transparent, honest about the things they can do, and also honest about the things they can't do. Understanding one's limitations is really important as a professional, but also as a lay person. So these sorts of things are golden nuggets, and you must do your homework. You must really do your homework and set time aside to do that. But it's true, even though you do all of those things, you may not be successful, but don't be disheartened. I know it's very impactful because you invest so much time into it, but don't be disheartened because somebody else, there's a place somewhere else for you, probably a better place, but you just don't know yet.
Thank you. Rupinder, was there anything you wanted to share, I guess, in terms of challenges or barriers you might have faced through the course of your career?
Yes, through the course of my career, there have been challenges, not necessarily in proceeding with board appointments, but very early on in my career, I was often asked why I wanted to go into the legal profession and whether it was the right profession, being from an Asian background, being female. My careers advisor said in a parents' evening, I think when I was 16 or 17 years old, said to my dad, I don't think she should proceed with a law degree. She's bright enough, but I don't think it would be a great career opportunity for her. So, at that point, my dad was very wary and very worried about me going off to university and studying law, but I pushed for it and continued, and luckily I did. But even going for job interviews, other candidates, there was a candidate in one of my very first interviews who actually said to me, it must be very, very difficult for you applying for jobs not being from here. And it immediately knocks your confidence. And, I stood my ground and I said, I don't understand what you mean. I am from here. And actually, he wanted to give me tips and guidance as to how to perform in interviews, which was, incredibly frustrating. It's, ridiculous that those sort of things can even happen. I think they do obviously still happen now as well. But you've got to remain confident and firm in your perspective and what you want to do and why you want to do it, and continue on that trend. And now, running an organisation of my own, I love the fact that we've got a great mix of people at our business. It's a large, diverse organisation. And as far as what I would want to see in other organisations is how I'm, although on a much smaller scale, running my organisation, I'm trying to make it more friendly for females and males to climb and progress in their careers. So you've got to think, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, you've got to make sure that you have things in place for your team. So if that means creating opportunities that are allow for the fact that women may be the carers in their family, so they might need slightly flexible hours. They may need to work in a slightly different way to other members of staff, but it's what's the value that they bring to you. You can't just say, well, you're not suitable for this role because you can't work 14, 15 hours a day and you can't be in the office for this length of time. You've got to adapt, because then you're bringing the best people to your team. And I think that's how boards are now operating, and larger organisations for their management teams are now working in that basis as well. And with everything that's going on with COVID, we're learning more and more that remote working is possible. I never believed, I was not a big believer in remote working. I would never do it. But now, working from home, my whole team's working at home. We're incredibly efficient. And it's certainly turned my point of view on that topic. But there are hurdles, there are obstacles, and they existed when I was first joined my career, and they exist now. But it's remaining confident, and I think that's just the key word here. It's mentally, you've got to bring yourself up to a level to know that there is a position for you, just like Robina said. There is something out there for you. It's perhaps whether or not you can hook on to somebody who's on a board, who can be a mentor to you and guide you into the kind of things that you discuss on boards, and see where you're lacking perhaps in some of the skills, and get those skills honed so that you're a rounded person before you apply, make your first applications.
Yeah, well, there's loads in that. Thank you. I mean, I think it is sort of, it's interesting what you're saying. As you were talking, I was thinking about the pandemic and the changes it's sort of made to us in the way we think about how we work as well, and the more flexible ways of working, I think, particularly because, many people at home now who are sort of have childcare or other care responsibilities at the same time as trying to work. So it makes it even more prominent in the discussion. And also, just about creating better inclusion, I think, within organisations, and diversity. You know, there's a wealth of evidence out there about how more diverse thinking, not just at the board level, but throughout organisations, makes for better decision making, for more successful organisations. It's, you know, it's so clear to me. It seems a no-brainer, right? But we don't seem to be sort of able to get over some of those challenges. You know, Tim, and I know when we were talking about the code, that there are some things in there. There's absolutely that desire to create. It's probably fair to say, I think, as you were saying earlier, the county FA boards probably aren't the most diverse boards across the picture. You talked a bit about some of that, particularly the gender representation even. And I was thinking, as you were talking through about the opportunities that might arise, how practically do you think that people can find out about those? Do you have any thoughts around opportunities for I guess knowing when they come up, and what people might be able to do to sort of apply to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, it is proven that diverse boards outperform non-diverse boards, so it's not a myth. You know, many of you on the call will be aware of the McKinsey research into this, which is still referred to today quite a lot, and it says that basically companies that are in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. And in the United Kingdom alone, greater gender diversity on senior executive teams corresponded to the highest performance uplift. For every 10% increase in gender diversity, profit, EBITDA, rose by 3.5%. So, you know, there is good, credible research to show that not only does it make sense that diversity brings more skills and helps organisations perform better, but there is research that proves that is the case. And that said, I've totally forgotten what your question was, Lynsey.
So I was thinking, you know, you talked about probably the over 100 opportunities that might arise because of some of the changes county FAs have to make, and I was wondering practically if there's a way that people could find out about those, just sort of purely from an information point of view, and you know, using all the steps that Rupinder and Robina talked about in terms of what to do next, but they first need to know they exist, I guess.
Absolutely, and this is a challenge for us. So these roles will generally go out on county FA websites. We do try and capture them on the careers page on the fa.com, so that's a good place to look. But I think there is an opportunity for us to work with the likes of Women in Football to potentially signpost these opportunities as they come along, because clearly it would be helpful if there was one place you could go to see where all these vacancies were, instead of trying to find vacancies across 50 county FAs. You know, by way of an example, Wiltshire County FA have just been appointing an independent HR director, and they used LinkedIn, they used the fa.com, their own website, and they got well over 20 applications, sifted, you know, applications that were going through for a more detailed review, and 14 of those were from women. So that was really encouraging, but that's not always the case. And quite often counties do say, we want to reach out to more diverse groups when we're looking to appoint independent directors, but where do we go? So potentially there's work we can do with Women in Football or other similar organisations to help signpost those opportunities, and I will undertake to try and do that and signpost those more. But for now, you know, if there's a county FA that suits your, you know, circumstances that you're interested in, first and foremost, look at their website, follow them on LinkedIn, and also keep looking at the fa.com, because we always try and mirror those vacancies on the fa.com.
Thank you. And I know, you know, we're talking about diversity in all sort of shapes and forms. And I know when we were talking about the code, the youth voice came up as part of that as well, and we had a discussion around making sure that boards included that. And I guess it links back to things that all the panelists have said about lived experience being important. So when you're younger and you don't necessarily have all the professional, sort of skills or a career of 20 years to sort of offer to the boardroom, it doesn't mean you haven't got anything to offer in those discussions. And it's sort of having that confidence, which equally might be hard when you're a bit younger, but to know that your viewpoint is just as valid. And I think we talked about it in the FA context because of the youth voice being important for the FA and who it's trying to reach and deliver to. I don't know if you just wanted to reflect on that for a little bit.
Yeah, so the two fastest growing areas of the game in grassroots are the women and girls game. That's doubled in the last 3.5 years. And that will see the biggest growth as we move forward. And also youth football. Youth football is still performing very well, whereas the traditional male affiliated 11v11 game is actually in decline as people turn to different formats of the game, shorter, more recreational formats rather than the 11v11 90 minutes structured leagues. So youth and women and girls, are growth areas. So you're absolutely right. Diversity is not just about skills diversity. It's everything. It's gender, it's ethnicity, it's backgrounds, it's experiences, it's age. And, Robina was making the point earlier around, just life experience. Now, okay, that, I totally endorse anybody to apply for a director's role, even if they don't have qualifications that they can hold up because they have life experience, or they're involved in community groups, or they have experiences working with youth groups or with children that may not be the case for other people on the board. What we find is a problem with boards of county FAs is groupthink. So groupthink happens when you get lots of people from similar cultures, similar genders, similar ages, similar experiences, getting together in a group. And if that happens, if I recruit loads of people like me and I ask them, what do you think of this idea? Guess what? They're probably all going to say, that's a great idea. Because they're not necessarily looking at it through the lens that others would look at it. So to avoid groupthink, any good board will have lots of diversity, lots of different lenses through which things are seen, which might be experience, age, gender, ethnicity. So, what I'm asking everybody on this call to really, validate in their own thinking is their own worth, to bring that cognitive and, experiential diversity to boards. We've all been in organizations where we've looked at people in certain positions and we've said, God, how did that person end up in that job? The answer often is confidence, because they believe they could achieve it. They put their hat in the ring when others didn't. And guess what? Eventually they were there and others weren't. So be confident. Like Robina says, put your hat in the ring and bring that diversity to the table. We need it on boards in counties, and boards across the country need it, not just in counties.
Thanks. Robina, I was going to ask you, because you've sort of been involved in boards from a younger age as well. I think Rimla sort of touched on some of that in her introduction, and I wanted to ask you about how, when you were younger, because I can see some of the chat down the side, people talking about imposter syndrome. We've all felt that, right? I felt that at times. What am I doing? If somebody's asked me to do this, do they think I can do that? I wondered if you're able to reflect on any of your personal experience when you were younger and being asked to do things, and how you approach that.
Yeah, just going back to some of the barriers that I experienced, some of the barriers were actually of my own making. So you can't be applying for that. You can't do that job. And what are you thinking? How dare you even believe you could do it? And that comes with over time. It comes with experience when you cross-check with yourself. But you do need your peers and people who are your significant others to say, go and have a try. Why can't you do it? go and have a go. You'll learn something from it. I can't emphasize enough the learning element. So when I on many boards when I was very young, I probably was the only person of colour and absolutely the youngest person on that board, and it was a very anxious time for me because I did question why did I get the job? Well, you got the job because you had the skills and you had the ability to do the job. You had the knowledge. You bring that to the table. But what else about you? Because other people will make judgments. Depending on what board you apply for, but particularly within the NHS, you're more likely to have colleagues who are semi-retired or retired completely. So if you're a working woman and you're a mother and you have 3 children, do you have time to sit on a board? Well, absolutely you do, because I did that. On one board, on my hospital board, I actually had the cheek to go and have a 3rd child. but again, going back to some of the struggle and understanding the importance that you bring. Irrespective of whether you see yourself on an island, you actually belong to a family, and the family being the board at that particular time, or any organisation in which you apply for or choose to work in. And being part of that family means that you are contributing to how that family is nurtured, how it grows, how it extends, how it transforms. And with the county codes, so I was thinking while Tim was speaking, that actually Manchester FA has done extremely well prior to the code. Our thinking, our vision, our ambition has always been to be diverse, not just in skill, but also in thinking, to be outside of the box rather than stay in the box. Because you can look at diversity and you can look at some of the challenges we face around, well, I won't go into those particular areas now, but there are lots of different challenges. But if your focus is only to be process driven, then you will stay in the box. But if your focus is to transform, so that you actually reflect the needs, the wants, the desires, the energy of the community that you serve, then you will think very differently. What the code offers is not the tick box culture, because we want to stay away from there. We want to be transformative. We want to be engaging. We want to invite people in. So we had somebody, a young person who sat on our board, who represented youth, because we believed it was the right thing to do. By having conversations with young people who you seek to inspire and to motivate, they inspire and motivate us too. It's a camaraderie, it's companionship, it's a relationship that grows and nurtures because we have confidence in each other. So age does not matter, and your skill set does not matter. What matters is the bringing relevance to the conversation that you're having in the board meeting. So how do we grow women and girls football? How do we deliver greater diversity? How do we make inclusion as an outcome actually deliver itself? And that comes from good leadership. So I'll say this, we've got a fantastic CEO. Colin Bridgeford is a fantastic CEO. He's a visionary, he's thoughtful, he's creative, but he listens. And that's another important skill to have on a board, that you listen carefully to what's being said. And you can listen carefully to what's being said if the board environment allows itself to be open enough to have difficult conversations. And the difficult conversations actually elicit the benefits, not just for how the board sees itself, but how it positions itself in the community it's serving. And football is, everybody has something to say about football. Governance is important because it regulates how you function, how you behave, and how you deliver your outcomes within the financial security. But you've got to invest in your staff. If your staff are happy, they'll be the great ambassadors that you want. But football is so much volunteer-led. And we mustn't lose sight of our volunteers. They have a skill set, they have ambition. Let's bring them on board to that pathway. And if anybody wants to come and be mentored or do some work experience, Manchester FA have always been very open to that, and we have apprenticeships all the time. And actually, if you relocate yourself within education, there's a pathway there that you can offer. So for me, good leadership delivers positive benefits. Being visionary and testing the water, and not to be afraid because you want to improve, and you are improving for the benefit of the community you're serving. With football, it's about all levels of football, including disability football. There's a link now with health and well-being, physical and mental health. Why is it there? Because somebody's finally got it. Actually, we fit together in a very important way, because communities are forward-facing towards health and well-being. And football delivers both that, but also the wider skills base that we've all been speaking about this afternoon.
Thank you. And I was thinking as you were speaking, and as we've all been speaking around, we talked a bit about applying to get onto boards, but it's just that once you're in the boardroom, and we're focusing on board, but I think we're sort of talking about leadership, you know, other leadership positions as well. You know, we're sort of using the board as an example, but it has to, once you get there, you have to feel that you're able to share your view as well, and that's the dynamic of that boardroom, and in particular the chair and how they run those meetings is just as important, I think. And I wonder, Rupinder, I was wondering if you had any sort of personal reflections of being in a boardroom and feeling I can say that or I can't say that, or because there's confidence there, isn't there, to be able to sort of speak your view and use your sort of lived experience to share and scrutinise and challenge.
No,
absolutely.
That's
something that you've come across?
Yeah, in both boards that I'm involved in at the moment, we're very lucky. The leadership is fantastic. At the FA with Greg and Mark, they're very good. They open the floor, they listen, they encourage conversation. And we've had very difficult conversations, and not one of us, I think in one particular topic we discussed, I was the only dissenting voice. But you are welcomed. The environment is such that you can put that dissenting opinion across, and very often I see my role as being that checks and balances person. You know, I'm questioning why are we doing this, and are we sure we don't want to look at this maybe, you know, and offer another opinion. And that's from maybe things that I might have done in a commercial case, a big contract that I've drafted for a client of mine, and I thought, well, hold on, we dealt with this very similar issue, but in this way, is this what we want to incorporate here? And you have an environment that's been created that you don't feel scared in discussing that or raising it yourself. And I think that's really, really important. And with the charity that I'm involved in, I mean, it's a medical charity to do with an illness, a particular illness that small children are afflicted by. And, you know, in that environment as well, obviously I'm not medically trained, I don't have a medical background, but it is about governance, it is about use of funds and where the charity is heading, the forecasts, etc. And it's even there, very good governance, very good leadership. And the floor is always open to introduce topics, discuss topics as freely as we want to. It's very, very important. It's just, if the leadership isn't there, your team is weak. And I think you can't have, you can't rule a board by, you know, in a dictatorship fashion. It's got to be a team-led experience. And I'm very fortunate that both positions offer that.
I think that's true, and I think often where things fall down are where you have that position of dominance, and which might be successful for a certain period, but doesn't last long. It's not sustainable, and actually the organisation isn't unlikely to be successful in the long term if it has that type of personality. I'm just looking down the questions at the side because I'm conscious we're sort of, you know, only 10 minutes to go. I can't believe how quickly the time goes. We have a question from someone. I'm just going to read it. It says, I do feel that sometimes I need to prove my worth a little. The other side is that I'm trying to take steps to make our board more representative of the community, fans, players and volunteers, but also through merit rather than tokenism. Is there any advice on this? I wondered if any of the panel had any advice.
I would say, you know, contribute, you know, be confident and contribute and say what you think when you're in that environment. You know, don't let this kind of, you know, turn down your confidence to contribute to the board meetings, because then I think you'd be in a vicious circle of feeling you're adding less and less value. So my advice there would be confident, say what you think. That's important. Honesty is important. And, you know, there's a great saying that, you know, common sense is one of the rarest commodities to be found. So even around a board table of highly skilled people, there may well be a lack of common sense from time to time, and I'm sure you could bring that possibly to the proceedings.
I use that word all the time when I'm talking about governance, that it's most of the time it's just common sense. There are, of course, technical aspects of governance, particularly when you're talking about the more formal sort of procedures of governance and setting up companies and things like that. But generally, it's just common sense. And if you've got good judgment, if something feels right, it's generally probably okay. If something doesn't feel right, then it isn't. I've had sort of worked with directors and boards over the years where directors have come to ask me if it's okay to do something, and I've generally said to them, if you're coming to ask me that, there probably isn't, you don't quite feel that it's right. So, but most of the time I think good governance is common sense, and so not that difficult. I think it's more, and I think that's what we're talking about here in this conversation, in terms of the skills and people having confidence to know that they can go into a boardroom and trust their own judgment. You know, their own opinion is just as valid as anybody else's. I think, Rupinder, you talking about being the only dissenting voice in a room, you know, having the space to do that, but also having the confidence to be able to say, actually, I don't agree with that, and knowing that your opinion is just as valid as anyone else's. You don't have to fit and conform and agree. You know, in fact, we're almost, when we're talking about diversity, we want the opposite of that, I think. And so I'm hoping that women in football members can sort of take that away and feel a bit more confident in going out to look for positions. There's a question here, Tim, again, which might be one. It sort of says, how can the FA Women in Football, I guess FA in this respect, encourage board positions at clubs to be advertised wider? You talked a little bit about it with the county FAs, but I guess it's probably seeking other opportunities to, not just with women in football members, but more diverse voices onto county FA boards. And that's probably a role of the FA, but also the county FAs as well, for sure.
Yeah, is that question, sorry, is that about county FAs, or did you say clubs?
I guess it's just encouraging board positions at clubs, well, clubs and county FAs, I guess. So it's that grassroots level of football being more open to pulling different people in.
Well, I think at the club level, the FA have committed to writing a voluntary code for clubs. This is something that Paul Elliott announced just a couple of weeks ago in an open letter. So I'm sure that over the coming weeks, that working group works through that voluntary code for clubs, and that will be a part of it, in being transparent. You know, one really important area of governance is transparency. You know, laying bare how your organisation works, what its governance structure is, how people are elected into certain roles. So, you know, as we become more transparent through adopting the code, which has several transparency requirements, I think that will help. But I go back to what I said at the start. I think there is an opportunity for us to kind of, you know, house all of our director opportunities in one place, so it's simple for people to find. And you know, I will undertake to explore that further, because I think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, and I'm just picking up another question. So I think we've been talking about having diverse views and different viewpoints around the board table, and somebody's asked about how important it is to have unity of vision. So I guess it's that, you know, board also being able to reach agreement and progress. From my point of view, I think, you know, it's being able to have that great discussion in that safe space of the boardroom, to be able to debate, scrutinise, challenge, use all different viewpoints, but then being able to come to agreement, which a good chair will be able to sort of gather their board together at the end of a really productive conversation. I don't know, Robina, is there anything you would reflect on that in terms of using those diverse voices, but then also being able to come up with a sort of agreement and solution at the end?
So thank you, Lynsey. So if we look at the composition of what makes a board, so a board is made up of two parts. You have independent non-executive directors, and then you all lay people, and then you have the CEO and the executive directors. So in terms of the independent role, the role is to hold the executive team to account for the delivery of the strategic objectives and the operational objectives, and how all those things come together. So all of the things we described when we defined governance. However, the board as a team works together to set the strategy and the vision. So you are united because you have to be. You work as a team, and although you may be independent, you are a contributor to that. So it isn't. Some people kind of just focus on the accountability bit, but boards. That's a given. What's really important for a board is to be strategic, is to have vision, is to evolve and to be responsive to change in a positive manner, to not get stuck in the process. I keep coming back to this. And that unity of vision evolves from good conversations. And there may be difficult conversations, but when a board is making decisions, it's made as a board. The non-executives don't make their own decision, the executives don't make their own decision. You make the decision as a board, as a team of people, having tested out, ensured that the governance has been delivered in terms of that assurance framework. So you look at the risk, you look at the mitigation, and you make a decision based on the evidence presented to you. If you are dissatisfied with something, it might be because there's a lack of information or the business case hasn't been thought through carefully. So you go back, you review, and the papers are brought back again. But that's done as a group of people with a shared understanding that they own the strategic intent of the organisation, they own the vision, and they want to make sure that it's delivered appropriately. So safeguarding within football is absolutely a key principle, and we mustn't lose sight of those sorts of elements, which are also key to how we have conversations. So unity isn't something, a good board, an effective board allows the difficult conversations because they're healthy conversations. And then you deliver unity in the way you make your final decision. If somebody is still in disagreement, then in principle that can be minuted and it lies, But actually, if you're an effective chair, you don't want to have to go to a voting, because you'd want to have to make sure that you've had those difficult conversations, you've presented the evidence in a succinct way, and you've given a really you've made good of something which may be challenging for the organisation, but you've made good because everybody around that table has contributed and been allowed to contribute. So the safe environment piece is also very important. So I think we mustn't lose sight for people listening on the call that to understand the composition of the board. What you are there to do as an independent person is different to what the executive director is there to do as an executive who is paid.
Yeah, it's really important. Thanks, Robina. And it was making me reflect as you were speaking as well around, if you haven't got the right information or you feel you don't, it's okay to say, I don't understand that, or often I think when you're sitting on a board you get a wealth of information, often packs of information and papers, which isn't always clear. There's assumptions made, particularly if you're an independent on a board, there's assumptions made about your knowledge. So it's, again, I guess we're coming back to that word of confidence, of being able to say, actually, I don't understand that, or I need a bit more information, and that's okay, and to do that, particularly if you're new to boards or you're new to the organisation, it's sort of feeling okay with that, and having the confidence. I'm conscious of time, and I'm wondering, we've had a few more questions come through, but maybe we'll be able to pick those up separately with Cassie. I wondered, just before we sort of have to log off, if I could ask each of you maybe for a practical tip. We've shared sort of some personal journeys and hopefully inspired some of the people listening to think about getting involved with governance. And I wondered if there's one thing, you've talked about a variety of things, but there's one thing you'd give them as a tip to go away. Maybe Tim, I could ask you first.
Yeah, I would say do research, understand the transferability of your skills, and apply. Don't, what's the worst that can happen? Start this journey now and go for it. Do your research. Don't just go in blasé. Do your research, evidence where your transferable skills lie, and go for it. That's what I say.
Thank you. Rupinder, is there anything you'd add?
I would say networking. I think focused, targeted networking, build up your relationships. You just don't know where that opportunity comes from. Be vocal. Let your networks know what it is you're going for, and opportunities very often can present themselves that way.
Thank you. Robina, anything else you wanted to add?
It's always good to apply for initially for those organisations that you share an interest with. Because if you're interested, then you have a motivation to apply. So understand your motivation. What is it that's drawing you to this position? Is it because you just want to have the experience of being on the board, which is good, but actually it should be much wider than that, because you need to sustain the motivation to stay in the role that you hopefully are successful in. Motivation is really important. And the other thing is to be honest with yourself. And even experienced board members, and I include myself in that, sometimes I am out of my depth and I haven't understood, but I'll put my hand up and say so. And I think that isn't resilience, that's being honest with yourself, because just putting your hand up and saying, can you repeat the question, or can you explain that again, I really didn't get it. Because to make informed decisions, you really do need to understand what's going on. And that comes through the learned experience. But it also comes because in any position in which you are in, whether you're training or you're in training or you aspire to be part of that process, we're all learning, and it's the engagement of learning that is really crucial to how you then go on to progress. So motivation, learning, and yeah, being you, and yes, definitely going for it, absolutely.
What a great way to end. Thank you so much to Robina, Rupinder and Tim for sharing with us your personal journeys and experiences, and I hope Women in Football members see it as a call to action, who are inspired by your journeys, take the practical tips you've shared and seek out opportunities locally to get involved. So good luck everybody, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone. A huge thank you from everyone that's been on the webinar, to Lynsey, to Robina, Rupinder, and to Tim, for such an absorbing and really fascinating conversation. And the more you guys spoke, the more I was reflecting on actually, you know, the Get On Board program, which I helped to deliver over the past year. And it was actually something I spoke about on a previous Women in Football webinar. And sort of the importance of mentoring and support for the women that we were looking to get onto sports boards through that program. You know, it wasn't about fixing the women, because, as you know, everyone's spoken about, we have the skills, we have the lived experiences. So it's very easy for us to, on paper, to get onto those boards, but it's often about that support system. And Rupinder was part of that support system, actually, as a mentor for one of our girls. But it's also about the other side, and Tim, you mentioned this about transparency. You used the word transparency, and it just reminds me about looking at the questions that were in the chat box as well, that it's about opening up the industry, about opening up the opportunities that are there. And it's got to be both. It's got to be us working on our confidence and getting the support system in place and networking, but it's also the industry opening up and being transparent about what's there. So that's really what struck me again, that reminder that this is still something that's needed and will be needed if we're going to see the change and see more of our women, including those here on those boards. So thank you, like I say, once again for that discussion, really fascinating. In terms of moving forward, do let us know on Twitter or over email, so that's events@womeninfootball.co.uk, your thoughts on this webinar. We'd love to have your feedback. We'll be running more of these sessions over the next few weeks, so do look out for an email invite in your inbox soon. And thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.